Morning, everybody. It's about 10 minutes after 11 on what's called in the Welt Gott's Nomen, B'Shem Hashem. The day after Yom Kippurim, I think it's from the Baal Shem Tov, it's called B'Shem Hashem, Gott's Nomen. Now, there's a lot of Hasidus on the significance of this. It's not just an allusion or a gleichwertel. The Nakuda is that there are 4 days between Yom Kippurim and Sukkot, and it corresponds to the 4 letters of Hashem's name, Yud Kei Vav Kei. Each day is a different letter. And the Inyan is, let me just fix this camera, that in Chassidus Chabad, they explain, this is of course the source of it is primarily the Kocha from the Rebbe Marash, but like everything else, the Rebbe Marash said it once, the Rebbe said it 100 times, in 100 different ways, that Tishrei, which begins with Elul, and it ends with Simchas Torah and Shabbos Bereishis and Zayin Cheshvan, is a mountain that you climb and then you climb down. The peak, of course, is Ne'ilas Yom Kippurim, which was last night. And then begins the V'Yaakov Holach L'Darkoi. Like it says in the Rebbe Marat, the V'Yaakov Holach L'Darkoi is Matzah Yom Kippurim. And the Rebbe brings it in the Sichos of Tafshin Lamed Ches, which we're learning the Maimorim of Tafshin Lamed Ches. You know, in Chabad, in convention, V'Yaakov Holach L'Darkoi is after Simchas Torah. But in Avodah, V'Yaakov Holach L'Darkoi begins after Yom Kippur. Because till Yom Kippur you're climbing, and the focus is on tshuva. And the truth of the matter is, the way it says in Chassidus, and of course this is how it's explained by Riches and the Vakocha, the focus isn't even on mitzvahs maisis, it's just on tshuva. You're going away from yourself to do tshuva, and of course, as you know, tshuva doesn't only mean to go away from Aveda, which has to do with Hachlatas Tevis, Kabbalah Lahabo. That's the most basic part of tshuva. Shalayosh Avoid Lakisla, that I won't do it again. But the focus is on the relationship with Kadosh Baruch Hu, that we call tshuva ilah. And after Yom Kippur begins mitzvahs. Like it says in Chazal, that till the first day of Sukkot, you're so busy with mitzvahs, there's no chance even to do an Aveda. And mitzvahs is shoiv, right? You don't get close to Hashem and then just walk away. You get close to Hashem, the maximum of that is Matzah Yom Kippurim, and you take that down into your regular life, into your Avodah B'Chol Mamish, which ultimately means Kiyum HaMitzvahs, learning Torah but doing mitzvahs. And of course, not everybody has a life that you could call Shabbos. You know, a Talmud Chacham is called Shabbos. That's why he wears a long beged rather than a short beged, because a long beged is not comfortable for Asiyas Melacha. Most people have to go out into the real world and to make a living and to be involved in Uvdin Dechoil. And that's the Tait V'Yaakov Holach L'Darkoi. But you take with you the Hisoidiros, the Tshuva of the Yomim Neroyim, and before that the Melech Basodeh, and the Chedesh of Tshuva, and the Yud Beis Yomim between Chayel and Rosh Hashanah and the Yemei Asliches. You take it into our life. In other words, the key of today is how it continues the Hisoidiros of the Yomim Neroyim and the Seres Yemei Tshuva and Yom Kippurim. Like the famous expression, the Rebbe once told a story by Fabrengen about how Italy was a backwards country. And it wasn't Germany. Things didn't always run on time. So there was the train was a new thing. The steam engine was a new thing. And one of the Rebbeim was in Italy, and he went to see the train. Or maybe he was in Italy anyway, and he was by a train station. And there was a locomotive. It's not like today that you have electricity running through all the cars. It was a locomotive that was an engine of steam. And it pulled an incredible force, right? Millions of horsepower. And they lit a fire. They threw in coal, and the water was made into steam, which turned the turbines, which made the locomotive move. But they forgot to couple the locomotive with the wagons, with the wagonen. So the locomotive took off, left the station, and all the wagons remained staying in their place. And the Rebbe Rashab learned to hear from this, that you have to see to it that the mefzubin in the cup mit dem Guf. If you have a head, and the head is not connected to the body, the Rebbe said the Lashon, es kann sein a fire, es kann pfeifen, es kann gehen a reach, Und die Waggonen bleiben stehen auf der Ort. The locomotive can be fiery and stormy, and there is steam coming out of the engine, and the wagons remain in their place. And the Loshna Chazal, Bosa Reisha Gufa Ozil, that the body is supposed to follow the head. And this is, of course, the challenge of the day after. It's the challenge of the day after Rosh Hashanah. It's the challenge of the day after Yom Kippurim. I'm sure you saw this in the Machzor. Mochras Yom Kippurim Machzirin Mashkimin LeBeis HaKnesses. Day after Yom Kippur, you go to daven early. Now, I don't know what the kavanah is. I certainly don't know what's the kavanah pnimis. But Pashtus, you davened, and you spent 24, 26 hours in shul, or you spent most of that time in shul, saying Tilim, and learning Chassidus, and learning Nigle, and talking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then when it comes to Yom Kippur at the end, you go home, you eat. You're exhausted, obviously, and you go to sleep. And you could wake up in the morning, and it's like it says by the Kikoyan, Bin Laila Hoya, Bin Laila Over. Yom Kippur is over, and the whole Seder is past. The Friedrich Rebbe used to say about American Jews, they heizen sich schnell on, and they killen sich also schnell up. American Jews get very easily inspired, and they just as quickly lose interest. That's not allowed to happen. And that's the concept of the day after. B'Shem Hashem. Today's Eis Yud. And the Gemara says, hey, tomorrow is also the yard site of the Heilige Malach, Rabbi Avraham the Malach, the Rebbe of the Alter Rebbe, the son of the Maggid. And of course, the idea is that you bring down, you take with you the Yesodus, the inspiration of Yechida, which you have on the Aseret Yemei Tshuva and on Yom Kippurim, into life, which means Maisa B'Peil Mamish, Mitzvahs Maisias, the security and the certainty and the continuity and the sustaining of the Yesodus is Mitzvahs Maisias. Why are mitzvahs so important? Because they keep the inspiration. And without the Mitzvahs Maisias, the inspiration doesn't last. And this is why you have to have mitzvahs. And beginning with sukkahs, there's mitzvahs. There's the lulav, there's the sukkah, there's the arava, there's the simchas beis hashiyeva, and v'chulu. So that's the b'shem Hashem. And that's the pshat in the famous story, which is brought in the Rebbe's letter from the early years, where the day after Yom Kippur, the Friedrich Rebbe went into his father, the Rebbe Rashab, and he said, Tatu, was is jetzt? Was is jetzt? In other words, they did tshuva, Elul, Rosh Hashanah, Aseret Yemei Tshuva, Yom Kippurim, what's now? So the Rebbe Rashab said, it's the dafnesh tshuva. Now you have to first do tshuva. And of course, the pshat is not to be Moresh Cheder and to say that the whole tshuva was gunished and start from the beginning again. It's a different kind of tshuva. It's called the tshuva of sheiv, not the tshuva of rotzah, where you're connecting yourself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but the tshuva of sheiv, where you're bringing that into your regular life. And this is called b'shem Hashem, God's nomen. It begins today that you're bringing it down. And maybe should help us all that in Mirza Hashem or Be'ezer Hashem we had a Sederus Tshuva Miti. And of course the point of Tshuva is that our lives should be lived in the spirit, practically, in the spirit and in the behavior and in the parameters and the control, in the containment of Yiddishkeit. And of course we know and we're taught, and it has to be said again and again and again, we're free in our being particular about learning Torah and doing mitzvahs the way the Eibishter says, even though it seems to control us. But in that framework, we find real chaydos, because it emancipates us from the Yetzer Hara and from weakness and from a lack of self-control and all the other midas rois that we don't call midas rois, we call them mili taiva, unfortunately. Now, I sent out a schedule, which is rather robust. It's a lot. I'm figuring, first of all, I'm doing everything on Zoom, except tomorrow. Tomorrow I'm going to be physically in Machachana, otherwise everything is on Zoom. So if I'm giving classes on Zoom, I might as well give more, like we did in the summer and last year, before we went back to work. So I want to teach 5 Maimer classes, today and tonight at 8. Every day, officially it's called for 10:30. It's already 11:30, come on. But I was preparing and I wanted to do this right. So I sent out a schedule. Bli neder. I have 5 Maimer classes, and today and tonight I'm going to be teaching the Maimer Kinesher Yair Kino and Bli neder tomorrow evening, and then Thursday morning and night I'm going to be teaching a very long Maimer from the Rebbe B'Sukkos Teishu Shivas Yomim. It's more than twice the size of the Knesher. I've allotted 3 classes for it. I don't know if I'll finish it, but we'll see how it goes. And then we have, of course, the Machachana regular classes Wednesday, tomorrow at 10:30, and Mr. I'll be in school. And I want to finish the shofar series that I've been doing in yeshiva, and that's also going to be live on Zoom in the yeshiva. So tomorrow, Thursday, and Friday at 8:15 in the morning, before I daven, I'm going to continue the shofar series because I always have an interest, right? Whenever I teach, I always have my secondary audience. And my secondary audience is not only you, but the people that are going to visit the site in years to come, because that's how I made my website, insatchasidus.org, that it should not be for the people and for the today, it should be for the archive. So any time, any place, anybody can learn these sugyas with Hashem's help, of course. So I'm not going to waste time. The maimed, it's a short maimed, Kinesher Yair Kino is a short maimed. And for those of you who are on Facebook, I actually posted it there. And maybe it's posted in other places, I don't know. But the maimed is posted on Facebook. I'm thinking now I could have posted it in other places with a click of a button. And maybe I'll do it before tonight's shiur. If I'm advertising the classes in a bunch of places, I should send the chomer. It's a short maimed, 6 amudim. But we're doing it in 2 classes. We're doing it in 2 classes because there's a lot here. There's a lot here. Let me begin as I did the last maimed and the maimed before. That the maimed of Tishrei Tafshan Lamed Chesar Hemshech, the first 3, that means Min HaMeitzar, Kinesher, Shuva, which we already learned, and Kinesher. These 3 maimed are a Hemshech, they're a series. What's the Nakuda? The Nakuda is that even when a Jew is on the highest levels, he still needs to do tshuva. He's still able to scream Min HaMeitzar, and you can even say Ki Chashalta B'Avinecha. But when you're in a high level, it's often hard. It's often hard to appreciate the nature of the Nisayan. So there's an idea, we tell HaKadosh Baruch Hu that we lack Rachmanas on ourselves. Because we're on a considerable station and level, we're not able to see the Geidel HaRachmanas, the great Rachmanas which is on us, that we're not on an even higher level. And we ask Hashem Yisbarach that the Eibishter should be made Rachim Rab Manas. And that's B'Rachamecha Rab Rachim Aleinu. And all 3 Maimarim, Min HaMeitzar, Shuva, and Kinesher share this Nakuda, that we're talking about people who are on higher levels, but compared to where they could be, and therefore where they should be, not only must they do Tshuva, but it's a Rachmanis. And that if they're not Margish, the Rachmanis on themselves, we ask Hashem Yisbarach to be made the Rachmanis. So we're going to start learning the Maimed. And what we're going to do is this. I'm going to read only the pasuk, and then I'm going to skip the first 8 or 10 lines, which are the most of the questions. I'm going to leave that for tonight, 8 o'clock, IYH, Im Yitzah Hashem. And then we're going to learn the second half of Perek Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Beis and Gimel, until the bottom of Chav Zayin. And I'm going to leave for tonight the end of Chav Zayin, Chav Ches and Chav Tes, and the questions in the beginning of the Maimed. I'm taking a Maimed which could theoretically be done in one class. I'm dividing it into 2 because I want to bring out the details. There's a lot of detail in this Maimed, a lot of depth, and there's also a certain symmetry, a certain order that, if for lack of words, that the Rebbe is being machadish. So let's begin. The pasuk says, "Kinesher Yair Kino," as an eagle wakes up her nest. So Rashi says that when an eagle wakes up her nest, she's very gentle. So she approaches the nest and she flaps her wings to arouse her unfledged chicks without frightening them. Al Gezel V'Rachim. Then she hovers above her, again, unfledged chicks. And here also, it says in the Maimed, you'll see it in Mitzvah Hashem, that this means that she envelops them with her wings. And then it says, Yifrech Kinofav Yikocheyu. These words are not in the Maimed, of course. Yisrael Alav Raseh. She carries her young above her wings, above her evarim, above her wings. Says Rashi, most birds carry their babies in their talons, between their legs, but the nesha who flies high, no, the others carries them above her wings. Now, of course, biologically, this is not factual. I don't know of a single bird that's able to lift its own young. As a rule, unfledged birds are heavier than fledged birds, so this is an inyan pnimi, or maybe there was a bird from Sheshes Mebreshis, which no longer exists, that's what I suspect, that had the koyach to lift its young. But the taich is that he raises her young above herself. And then, of course, it finishes, Adeshem Badad Yanchenu Ve'eni Mekel Echad. The Eibishter leads the Jewish people in a way of Badad, where they're exclusive, they're alone with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and there's no other nation, and there's no other entities, it's just a relation between Yidden and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Maimed is going to focus on the word Kinesher. So I'm skipping down to where I put my number 1, which is about 8 lines to 10 lines into the text. Gam tzarich lov mashakasav Kinesher b'chafadimim. We compare the Eibish's relationship to the Jewish people to an eagle. And we say it's similar to, but not identical with, a nesher, an eagle. Now, I'm not going to keep you in suspense. You'll see in the Maimed that nesher is in harachamim. The idea of a nesher is in harachamim. And remember that before I started learning inside, I gave you the introduction about the idea of barachamecha rab mrachem aleinu, the idea that there's rachme shamayim that's needed to be evoked on us because the Yid could be in such a high madrege that he doesn't see that compared to where he should really be, as they say in Yiddish, sagrei sarachmanas. If a person's in the dumps, he knows it's a rachmanas in it, but a person's on a high level, but he's meant to be on a higher level still, you need to have rachmeim shamayim to arouse in him a sense that it's a rachmanas in him and it needs to grow even higher, which of course one of the ideas of tshuva, like it says in the tshuva in Perek Zayin, at the beginning of Perek Ches. Okay? So it's a Kinesher Yair Kino. The Eibishter's midas harachmim is being ba'oire rachmim by Yidden. But now let's read the Maimer. It's similar to an eagle, right? It says the Rebbe like this. The mashma shezeh dugma is a dove. When you say that the Eibishter's relationship to the Jewish people is similar to an eagle, you're saying that there's a comparison between Hashem's relationship with us and an eagle's relationship with its nest, with its unfledged young. As the case is with an eagle, the same is true by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Says the Rebbe, you must understand, when you compare two things to one another, there has to be two details. Because if there aren't two details, then it's not a comparison. Either it's exactly the same, or it's not similar at all. There must be two details. On the one hand, there has to be some relationship between the two, otherwise it's not a dimyan, it's not a comparison. Skip the parenthesis. On the other hand, they're not the same. As I always say, correlation is always simplification. When you compare two things, it makes it easy to understand generally or basically, but it takes away the precisely. They're not the same. But nevertheless, there are occasions where you have no choice. So you use a mashal by default, and the mashal is similar to the nimshal, but not identical with the nimshal, right? So the Rebbe now explains. When we compare the Eibishter to an eagle, that the Rachmanos of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is compared to the eagle. Shadei Teda said Memedama is the same because Teda compares them. On the other hand, of course, the Rachman of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to be higher than the Rachman of an eagle. It's only a comparison. So the Rebbe says, if you could imagine a physical eagle having Rachmanos on a physical nest, understand that the Eibishter also has the Rachmanos on the Jewish people, but it's on a higher level. Okay, now if you wanted to stop here and bellow, koch, the koch would be about the Rachman of HaKadosh Baruch Hu on Yidden in this world. That the Eibishter has made a Rachman Rab on Yisrael, on Yidden, and this doesn't only affect that they should be able to do tshuva, but they also Poshet gives them Shefa Bracha V'Atzlocha and Bona Chaim Ezein Revicha B'Kolom Revicha B'Teva Nira V'Nigel Matas Hatvachim Amza Agashmin Dvorim Gashmin Kipshut. Hashem has Rachmanos. So the first taich of Kinesher Yair Kino Al Gezol V'Achav, as the eagle is sensitive to its young, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is sensitive to the Klal Yisrael. In other words, he doesn't just give, but he gives us so gently and so deliberately and so patiently that we receive it in the most useful and constructive and manageable way. But then the Rebbe continues. Al-pi ma'amei Rashallah, it says in Kabbalah, that the Teda really first speaks in higher worlds and only hints to the lower worlds. And in the bracket, the Rebbe says there's an opposite Maimer Chazal, which he calls Maimer Ha'elam, even though it's a Ramban. I wrote it on the margin. But the Rebbe often brings this Shalah, but he also brings it from the name of the Ramemi Pano Dachzachmer. Here he brings it in the name of the Shalah, but in other places he brings it in the Asaram Amoris, which is before the Shalah. That the Teda speaks on high, and and it hints secondarily b'tachtenim. So, if the pasuk says that Hashem's Rachmanos on Yidden, or in His world, is similar to the Rachmanos of an eagle on its young, so in addition to the simple taich that it goes on Yidden, the Shomes begufim in this world, that Hashem has Rachmim on us, also, and not also, but primarily because the Teda of the Beres Bal Yedim first, and b'tachtenim second, this is a Rachmim on Yanim Ruchnim. So even though the simple meaning of the pasuk is that Hashem has a sensitivity and a rachmanis on Klal Yisrael, like a eagle has on its young, begashmius, it's also speaking in Klal Yisrael beruchnius. It has to. And therefore the Rebbe says, moving, it's understood, Shakos of Kinesher, that this pasuk which compares the Rachmim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to the Rachmim of an eagle, but that it's on a higher level, Medaber ala Nesher Shebal Yainu, speaks about a higher eagle, Umizeh moving, and it's understood, therefore, Sha'nimshal Mizeh, that it's analogous to L'may Lagam Nesher Shebal Yainu. So first of all, it can't just mean the physical eagle that's having physical Rachmanis. It has to mean the spiritual eagle and the spiritual Rachmanis. But the Torah is speaking about the spiritual eagle. No? So if the Torah is speaking about the spiritual eagle, because of the principle of then you have to say HaKadosh Baruch Hu that's even higher than that. So you have a minimum of three. The comparison between the Rachmanis of an eagle on its young and Hashem's Rachmanis on Yidin Begashmias. The comparison between the Rachmanis that the eagle has in its young and the Eibishter having Rachmanis on his world from the Madrege where the Eibishter is called Nesher. And then you have to say Kinesher, there's a Madrege which the Eibishter is even higher than Nesher. And nevertheless, it's Kinesher Yair Kino, but it's higher. Okay. Next paragraph. The Pshat is azoy. Before about Drusha, beginning with look at the tail. The eagle doesn't mean only the physical eagle; it means the eagle in the divine chariot. All of them, I regard the divine chariot. It says Pnei Larbatan, the face of an eagle, and of course, the face of an eagle is in Rachmim. Because on high, the Eibishter Kvayachal has a chariot with four wings, four legs that carry, so to speak, Adam Ha'elyon. One of them is in Rachamim, the eagle. That it manifests in the physical eagle, that its biological nature is to be a Rachim al Yoladeha. Rashi explains that the eagle down here, when it comes to its own young, is incredible Rachmanis Kepirish Rashi. So the idea of Nesher in the Merkov is in Rachamim. So therefore we're saying two things. Not only are we saying that there's a comparison between the physical eagle and the Eibishter's Rachmanis Nas physically, there's a comparison between the physical eagle and the eagle in the Merkava that Racham the Eibishter has Kvayachal from the Merkava Ha'elyon. And you're going to see later, of course, the Rebbe is going to say even higher than the Merkava Ha'elyon. But now the Rebbe interrupts. This next paragraph is a Maimer Amuzgir, which is that the Rebbe is going to connect Rachamim to Emes. And then he'll go back to the Kinesher Yair Kino in the paragraph after that. It says the Heilige Rebbe, Yaakov's midah is Rachmanis, right? Avraham is Chesed, which is the right, Yitzchak is Gevura, which is the left, and Yankov, which is the center. The middle pole is Rachamim. Gevura, Betan, it says in Perek Memhei, and at the end of Perek Chavtes, I believe. Bepirish Masha or Chavches, Bepirish Masha Kosav Yishu Yankov Lerachel, or Lamed the end of Lamed Befirish Masha Kosav Yishu Yankov Lerachel is Kelev Ayev Kubakama Mamor. Gam, as it's explained also in the Dushim of Tekiah Shefer that Ram is Mimin, and Yankov is the Emtzikav Emtzai, which is Rachmim. And now the Rebbe asks the question, Vihine Midas Yankov Midas Emes. We know that Yaakov's midah is Emes. Emes is truth. And we all know the Chazal about Emes and Chesed. Chesed is kind and forgiving and embracing. And Emes is severe and exact and precise. And Emes Amar Al Yivro. So how does Rachamim and Emes jibe? So the Rebbe says, how can there be a correlation between the midas and Rachamim, which is, people use the word pity, but that's a bad word. I know a Jew many years ago who hated the translation pity. It's empathy. It's a mitzvah, to feel what the other person feels. Like the famous Lashon HaPasuk, Ba'asher Hu Sham. Shishneim Hem Midas L'She Yankov, because Yaakov's midas Rachamim and Yankov's midas Emes, they're not consistent at all. Achayin, who the answer is, no, Rachamim is Emes. You should know that the fact that there is compassion is actually mitzad bechinas Emes, has to do with Emes. How is compassion connected to Emes? Because compassion is not dishonesty. True kindness is dishonest. Kindness means you give everybody, deserving, not deserving, and sometimes even good for them, not good for them. Kindness just gives indiscriminately. Compassion feels what the other person is experiencing. And if you feel what the other person is experiencing, you feel the other person. No, if you feel the other person, you know whether the person is worthy or not, whether it's good for them or not. And sometimes you say you're going to give even they don't deserve it because it's good for them. That's rachmim. You're not going to give them something destructive, but you're not only going to give them what they earned. And Torah is going to argue that midah, where you can feel the other person's ma'amid situation, and you can therefore feel them, and you can feel their weaknesses and their pain and their errors and their bad judgments. And midas HaChesed says, don't even think about it. Midas HaGvura says, they don't deserve it, don't give. Midas HaRachma said, what's the best thing? And sometimes the best thing is to give even what is undeserved. Sometimes the best thing is to give what is undeserved. And that's midas HaRachmim. That's midas HaRachmim. That's the mile of midas HaRachmim. Says the Rebbe said, Rachmanas and Emes are the same thing. Because Emes doesn't mean a critical, unadulterated exactitude. Emes means a functional exactitude. What's the best way to get the truth in each world, and to each person, and each situation? And therefore the truth is midas harachmim. And the Rebbe adds, listen to this. Val derech mashen is bayat lil, says the Rebbe. I spoke in the previous maimer, and again I said it in my introduction to today's class because I wanted it to come across absolutely clear. There's a request, with your great mercies have mercy on us. And it said in the previous maimer, based on the Likutei Torah, that the Eibush has to invoke his mercies and his great mercies. Why? The key eventually, and I added on the top of the page, ha'adam. So the person hasn't reached a sense of emes in himself. He certainly hasn't reached a level which is called absolute truth. Skip the parenthesis. He doesn't feel the mercy on himself, and conceivably he doesn't even feel the rachmanas on the next person, the compassion, the mercy on the other. We ask Hashem to evoke His great mercies. So sometimes you don't feel the rachmanas because you're in a very low state, and sometimes you don't feel the rachmanas because you're in a very lofty state. And compared to your very lofty state, you say, does it make such a big difference if I don't cross from here to here? And midas emes says, yeah. And therefore midas emes is made a rachmim. In other words, you could look at the connection between midas emes and midas rachmim in two ways. One is that Gvura says you don't deserve, and Rachmim says you do. And the other is that Gvura could say it's good enough, and Rachmim say it's not. You see? In other words, Gvura is very exact. But Gvura's exactitude is according to a certain world. And according to that world, you may have achieved a certain shleimus. And Midas HaRachamim says that emes it's not, or emes lamite it's not. So you have a very interesting thing here. The basic idea is that the Rachamim means you feel the other. And therefore you don't only feel the judgment, but you feel the reality. Now the judgment means how that person should be judged based on his actions. The reality is you feel the person, and you ask what's best for this person, and the answers are frequently not the same. Whether this person deserves or doesn't deserve is one question. Whether this is good for this person or bad for this person is a very different question. And that's the difference between Gevura and Rachamim, Tiferes, Emes. But there's two sides to it. One side is you're giving the person who Mitzad Midas HaGevura doesn't deserve, is lower than it. And Rachmana says give him. But there's the other side. That Midas HaGevura says he's good enough. And Midas HaRachmim says in Nachal Tzarachmanis, it's not emes. And this is the pshat in the Maimed. Like I said, it's a hemshach to the Maimed before, and it's based on the Likutei Torah, but Rachamecha, Rab, Racham, sometimes a person doesn't know it's Rachmanis on him. Why? His station is very good. His station is very high. His station is very adequate, and more than adequate. So he's good. We all want to grow, but it's not a Rachmanis on us. Our situation is not terrible, it's not dire. And the Eibush sees it different. It's like Midas HaEmes, there's a Seder, there's a Midas HaRachmim. So now, go back to the Pasuk. Kinesher Yair Kino, Al Gezal V'Racham. The Eibush is like an eagle. That's made a Rachmim, which means he's made a Rachmim to the extent of Emes. On the one hand, even if we're not yet deserving, if it's good for us, he gives it to us. On the other hand, if we're very deserving, if it's not yet good enough, he's made a higher Rachmim. So Kinesher Yair Kino means Hashem has Rachmanas and us begashmias. And he gives us kol tu begashmias beruchni b'tevanir v'nigla matam asarat tfach b'elam hazeh amayis and now mamish. But then there's the ruchnius. in other words, our need to grow spiritually and to arouse in us a rachmanis on ourselves, that we should do the work to grow. And this applies to the physical person, it applies even to the Merkava Al-Yena, and you'll see soon that there's Kama Madreges in this itself. And ultimately, it's even higher than the Rachmim of the highest Merkava, because it says Kinesher. Hashem is not an eagle, he's like an eagle, he's even higher than an eagle. Next paragraph, number 4. V'hine. Inyan Rachamim, the idea of compassion, b'chinas pnei nesher shebemerkava. If the Rachamim doesn't mean the physical Rachmanis on our physical lives, but it means the Rachmanis of the divine chariot that has the Midas HaRachmim represented by the eagle, says the Rebbe, b'chinas shalamata mi'armakav. You can't have mercy on yourself. You can't have mercy on what's higher than you. So the mercy has to be on something less than you. In other words, what's above the Merkava, which is Ein Seif, it's certainly not a Rachmanis. Why? It's Davik and Elokus. Even on the chariot itself, when the chariot views itself, it sees itself as quite adequate. And he explains, I just skipped 2 lines. And notice in footnote 19 it says Chosek Tzas. The Rebbe explains why the Merkava cannot see its own chesreinis and have rachmanis on itself, and it's missing in the Maimer, unfortunately. It says, hey, look at Rebbe Chaim, therefore, every level that is me'ered rachamim is me'ered rachamim, something less than itself. And again, as the Rebbe said before, sometimes a yid can't see the rachmanis on himself, and he needs the Eibush to be me'ered these rachamim. So the Rebbe says, we're talking about the eagle in the divine chariot, and its midas emes and evoking rachmanis. It's al madregas shalamata mi'ar merkava, has to be levels lower than itself, lower than the chariot. However, there's levels to the divine chariot. There's merkavat hato, which is called Yud Beis Bokar, which is Elam Abriya. Then the last words on page Chaf Hey. There's Makaftei Allah. Turn to page Chavav now, which is the Madreg of the Ovis, Chagasa Vatzilas. So the Rebbe says, second line from the top of page Chavav, and in each of these levels, each chariot is evoking Rachmanis or invoking Rachmanis on the levels lower than itself. So now you not only have that the Merkava is made in Rachamim on the Yid Begashmis, but that the Merkava is Elyena is made in Rachamim, the Merkava Tachteina. That the idea that there's the face of the eagle in the divine chariot, which is having rachmanis, it's maldregis shalamata me'ar merkava. Obviously, it means this world. It's lower than the chariot, and even the merkava tato. So rachmanis has to be directed downward. So the merkava of Atzilus can have rachman, the merkava of Bria, etc. till us. Yeah. What about Atzilus itself? Can you make it rachman Atzilus? Atzilus is el ma'achtus. Le'yigur chara had dveikis. Says the Rebbe Omnam. Next paragraph. It says in the pasuk Kinesh that Eibush only like the eagle, but he's really higher than an eagle. In other words, koya b'chinas shalamaylim b'chinas hanesh. That by the Eibush to the union of Rachmanis, which is above the whole idea of an eagle, it's compared to an eagle in the idea that he has rachman. So you have to say that there's a Rachmanis which is even higher than the highest eagle, the highest Merkava. In other words, higher than Atzilus. And when you're talking about the Rach, which is higher than Atzilus, you could say that it's even the Rachmanis on Atzilus. Could you imagine that? Right? And the Rebbe continues, when you're talking about the eagle. And based on the principle from the Shaloh, the Namem Mipano, that are Teretz Beres Bal Yenim, and Bishnias Petachtenim, which is going on Bechinas Arachmim of Seder Ishtal, says the Rebbe, by adding that the Eibush is only compared to an eagle, but he's actually higher than an eagle. It's Koya Bechinas Arachmim Shalamayla, Ma'ishtas Bechinas Kav, it's Arachman, which is above the Kav. It's above the compassion that an eagle can evoke. In other words, because the eagle is the only madrega, and an eagle is a form. Whether you're talking about it physically or metaphysically, it's a form. And its rachamim is connected to kavim. There's yamin, smell, empty, right, left, center. And the rachamim of a nesher is therefore in ishtalshalos. So, when you say Kinesher, the Eibush is compared to an eagle, but higher than an eagle, that means it's higher than the rachmanis of midas hateferes of Atzilus. And I wrote on the margin, that it says in Samachay, I didn't write the page and I didn't have a chance to look up the Sefer, that there's 3 madregas in rachamim. The lowest madrega is called the rachamim tzadam murgish, which means I feel your pain. You have compassion for somebody else because you feel what they feel. But pashtus, that's the madrega of Seder Ishtashlos. Then there's a second madrega which is called rachamim mitzad haroimimos, that the rachamim is because you're so far away from the one below that you feel them. And the highest madrega is called rachamim pshutim. Mercy is without any association at all. It's above a relationship, and yet the mercies are drawn. However that works. The rachamim of Seder Ishtalshus, but Pashtus is the first madrega, the madrega of Morgish. The rechem that the Rebbe is now going to speak is l'chayda the second madrega and possibly the third madrega. I assume it's both. That the Eibush has rachmanos in his world not because of what he has in common with us, but because he has nothing in common with us. And the Rebbe says, Kinesher, that even higher than Ishtalshus, the Eibush is like an eagle, meaning that the madrega of rachmanos, which is above, say that Ishtalshus, that its relationship to the world has nothing to do with proximity, nothing to do with closeness, nothing to do with similarity. There's nothing similar about the mirachim, elukus, ain't safe. And the misrachim, the creation, nevertheless we compare it to the way Hishtalshus has rachmanis, which is based on a midah, which is based on a murgash, which is based on a closeness, teaches the Rebbe kivin sheshlem shaychas lebechinas rachman the Seder Hishtalshus, because they have a relationship with the rachmanis of Seder Hishtalshus. We're comparing really apples and oranges, and we're saying that they're both fruit. That's basically what we're doing. Rachmanis is a midah, right? The word midah means a measure, a distinctive thing with certain characteristics based on certain parameters. What did the Rebbe say about the Rachmanis? It's like emes. I feel you. I don't only feel your righteousness, your lack of righteousness, I feel all of you. And if I feel all of you, I can determine what to give, not only based on what you deserve, but who you are. Sometimes it means that I have to give you even though you don't deserve. And sometimes it means I have to demand even though you're quite good as you are right now, right? Rachmim above Ishtalshus is not about a closeness, it's about a distance. Whether it's mitzad ha'reimamos or mitzad ha'pshitus, it's not because of a proximity. Nevertheless, the pasuk says they have similar characteristics. One can be compared to the other. And he gives you the framework for it. He gives you three examples. Al derech binyan mavur binyan ratzon atachton ratzon elyon. And the next line, Shuvat Atah and Shuvei Allah. And the line after that, Yirat Atah and Yirei Allah. I got to tell you, these three lines are three whole Maimorim. Oh! It's such a condensed few lines. And you have this in a few places in this Maimir, which is why I'm giving the Maimir in two classes and not in one. There is Ratzon, will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is completely unreasonable. Ain't Tam L'Ratzon. And then there is Yesh Tam L'Ratzon, Tam Komos and Tam Goli. All the Ritzenis have something in common. They're urgent. I don't remember where this discussion is. From Zayed, Is Ratzon v Is Ratzon. They're all similar. Then there is also the same thing about Tshuva. Tshuva Atah and Shuvei Allah, even though they're so different. And I don't remember seeing a discussion on that either. But the discussion on Yirat Atah and Yirei Allah I do remember. It's the principle of Bittul. The difference between Ava and Yirah is a Yirah is Bittul. So all Yiras are connected. That's why Yitzchak, you don't find twice in the Torah Yitzchak. Right? You have Avram, which is Chesed. You even have Yankiv, which is Teferes. You don't have Yitzchak. Because all Yiras are connected, the source of it is Bittul. But the Rebbe wants to argue that just like all Yiras are connected, so too are all Tshuvas connected, and all Ritzein is connected, and then all Rachamim are connected. The Rebbe makes this comparison. Even though, like I'm telling you, that another Maimorim it says, you have Yankiv, because there's two different Yankivs, two different Rachamim. You don't have two Yitzchaks because there's no two different Yiras, because the Yesod of Yir is Bittul. Bittul is always the same. Here the Rebbe is saying it the other way. That just like there's a connection between the highest Yir and the lowest Yir, and the highest Tshuva and the lowest Tshuva, and the highest Ratzon and the lowest Ratzon, there's a connection between the highest Racham and the lowest Racham. How, he doesn't say. He just simply states. And v'chein hu binyan Racham. My compassion is the same thing. That even though compassion of Seder Hishtalshus is about feeling the other, the closeness to the next, is connected to the Racham, which is above Seder Hishtalshus. In footnote 26, he's actually mitzayin to a Maimir. By the way, in footnote 24, he finds a corollary b'negei to Ratzon. B'negei to Tshuva, there's no Maramokim, but by Ratzon and by Yirah, there is a Maramokim. And by Racham, there's also. So, at the moment, I don't know what the pshat is. In other words, how feeling another person be'emes, not just what you're judging, but the whole person, based on closeness, and feeling the other person based on distance, or based on absolute measure, are compared to one another, are similar, I don't know. But this is what the Rebbe is asserting. And therefore, there's even Rachmanas above Seder Ishtalshalos. No. So when above Seder Ishtalshalos, having Rachmanas, he's having Rachmanas on Atzilus. Even on Atzilus, it's Rachmanas. Atzilus is Alakus, it's ain't safe, it's Dveikus. But it's Midas, Kavim. And Kinesher Yair Kino, just like the eagle, which is Midas at the Feres of Atzilus, but higher than the eagle. The Midas HaRachman, which is an ain't safe, has Rachmanas on the worlds lower than itself, including Merkava Ilah, including even Atzilus. What's the Rachmanas? What's the Rachmanas? And you have to remember that the Rebbe wants to tie in this Rachmanas to the theme of Berachamecha Rab Merachem Aleinu, that it's a Rachmanas when you don't see a Rachmanas on yourself. Says the Rebbe, V'hinei Mashakos of Kinesher Yair Kino, the pasuk that says that an eagle arouses mercy on its own young. Ko Yalbachinas Arachmem Shalamayla Mishtalshalos, which is a reference to Rachmem above Ishtalshalos. But Behemshech Mashakos of Lifnei is connected to the earlier psukim. At first it says the Eibishter chose us. We have holy Zaydis, and he chose us Yatsev Gibulis Awam Mitzvah Bnei Yisrael. And then we ended up in a desert. And they took us out of that desert and they made us his. So the pasuk says, Yim Te'eyu Be'eretz Midbar, Hashem found us in a desert. But before we were lost in the desert, it says, first, the Jewish people are the portion of Shem Havaya, and they're the cord that's connecting us to Him in whatever world we're on. After you say, and after you say that we went from being Chelik Elakami Mal Mamish to being in a desert, it says Kinesher Yair Kino. So the Rebbe says, if you're looking in the Chumash, Chelek Hashem Ame Yankim Chal Nachalase is Kapitel Lamed Beis Pasuk Tes. Yom Te'eyu Be'eretz Midbar B'Sei Yolel Yeshimen is in Kapitel Lamed Beis Pasuk Yud, and the Psukim Kinesher Yair Kino is Kapitel Lamed Beis Pasuk Yud Alf and Pasuk Yud Beis. They go in order. The idea of a Yid being a Chelik Elakami Mal Mamish, of course, referring to the Neshama. Shagam bebechinas Ame, even as we considered his nation, Ame Loshen Eimemes. Harei Chelik Mishem Havaya Baruch Hu, we're a piece of Ein Seif. And then Sham Shachos, so late it lives Labish Beguf Ha'adam. Then it's drawn to come into a body in this physical world, which is the Madreg of Heitatolak. It says Niger Sachu. But Alpi my Merabal Shem Tov says nevertheless, or Bechelki, a drop of essence is the whole of essence. And therefore, Muvan Gamit understood being in a Neshama, as far as the Neshama is concerned, Shema Yetzer Chelik Havaya, Eshbakol Etzem, even though it's only a piece of Shem Havaya, the whole Eibishter is in the Neshama. The Neshama, which is the truth of a Jew, which is the true Chelik Elakami Mal Mamish, finds itself in the desert. The Neshama comes into this world. Now remember, the Neshama's coming into this world was called in an earlier Maimed and Aveda, which we didn't commit, the Eibishter committed. But it's a Yerida. No, and the Neshama, the way it is in this world, is so holy and so connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and of course it's, like the Rebbe is saying in the Marmar was Ha'tshel, every Yid in the highest Madregas, Kol Yisrael B'cheskas Kashrus, and Amech Kulam Tzadikim, and we all did Tshuva, but it's in a guf. And compared to the truth, it's a Yerida. Which is notwithstanding that the way that Rebbe is learning in this Hemshech of Tishrei, Tavshin Lamed Ches, every Jew is on the highest of levels, and he's done tshuva, and he's a tzaddik, and he's becheskas kashrus, compared to where he comes from, it's a yerida. Because it says in the Sid, the Neshama, Shem Sat B'Tei Heidehi Shidel Bechinas Atzilus. The Neshama is considered Tahir, which is the world of Atzilus. And then Yabrasi, it's at the Nefachta, which goes on Bri Yitzir and Asiyah. And then it comes into Atzibig B'Gi, Lebechina B'Degesha, and then Tachtena B'Yes, the very lowest of levels. Which is why it says Ve'ato Meshamra B'Kibi, the Neshama needs to be preserved. Now the Pachat, the Pshat of Ve'ato Meshamra B'Kibi is Eibush has to preserve the Neshama in the Guf. It's Hepech HaTeva, the two opposites, and they coming together. Neshama and Guf is a Pele. But on the other hand, Shmira Tzricha, Shmira Mu'ula Shaleitin Azik, should person get hurt, shouldn't be damaged by this world. That's why it says Ve'ato. And Vayidei Hashmir Devatam Neshama B'Kirbi, because Hashem is guarding the Neshama, Leizu Bulvacha Neshama Ein Nizekes B'Yidaso Be'ela. First of all, the Neshama isn't damaged by coming into this world. Ela Ad Rabbi, to be sure, Shepiel Saliyah Be'ela, but affects an Aliyah in the world. 5 days and it tastes a bot, the neshama has an aliyah by affecting aliyah in the world. I said it backwards. By the neshama affecting aliyah in the world, the neshama itself has an aliyah. And the Rebbe says, this is the real reason why the neshama comes into this world. So the neshama should go up to a higher madreg. And the word is, and the neshama comes into this world and serves Hashem, learns Davis, does everything wonderfully. What's the Rachmanis? It's doing its mission. It's doing it very well. The Rachmanis is it was in a better place before. And the Rachmanis does not allow for the neshama to go back to where it was before. It has to go to a level above that. Otherwise, it's not justified. And that's the Pshat Kinesher Yair Kino. And of course, one of the details here is this idea that I keep mentioning, and the Rebbe keeps on mentioning, is the neshama may not know the Rachmanis. He's a frum yid, he's a chsidish yid, he's a shliach, he's a successful person. But the Eibush defines what needs to be even better, and he's made a rachmim rabim, not just rachmim from hishtalshalus, but even rachmim higher than hishtalshalus, that the neshama should have an aliyah. And he says, this is really connected to tomorrow's class, honestly. And I don't want to give away tomorrow's class. But the idea is that because the Rachmanis, that Hashem is ma'eded on the neshama, and only the Eibishter made it the Rachman, the neshama, because the neshama itself may not feel that it's in such a bad matzav that it's a Rachmanis on itself. So the Eibishter is ma'eded. Through this you have the Yiri, the Tzerech Aliyah, and the Aliyah is called Alav Rasi. If Rasi goes to the Kelim of Atzilus, as I'll explain tomorrow about Yichas Bli Neder, tonight, 8 o'clock will be a second class. Alav Rasi means even higher than Atzilus. This is ascending to a place above where the neshama was before it descended, because it came from the madreg of the Satabi, which is Atzilus. And you have to say that the Tzerech Aliyah, in other words, you have to say two things. The neshama comes into this world, even though itself it's perfect, to elevate the world. And the neshama comes into this world to elevate itself. Because you have to say, even if the neshama is accomplished something very meaningful, vis-a-vis the world, that's not sufficient. You have to say the neshama is also accomplishing something very meaningful vis-a-vis itself. The neshama has to go even higher than it was before, and this is higher than the madrega of Nesatabi. I'm now 6 lines from the end of the paragraph. However, so long as this aliyah to the madrega is safe higher than until it has not been achieved, which justifies why the neshama comes into this world. In other words, it's not enough to say one without the other. You have to have both. The neshama is coming into this world, is to elevate the world. But it's also the neshama is coming into this world to elevate the world. To the neshama should also have an aliyah in itself. If a yid is already in the madrega of Atzilus, says the Rebbe, imagine a neshama of Atzilus, a neshama who's acting in the madrega of Atzilus down here, which is a pele gadol, it's a rachmanis. But sometimes, if you're a neshama baguf, and you're in the highest of levels, as the Rebbe describes it down here in this world, you're in the madrega of Atzilus, you don't see the rachmanis on yourself. That even the highest madregas, compared to what they could be, this is not emes, and therefore it's rachmanis. That's the hemshech haksuvim, that since a yid is chelik l'kai v'ya ame, and he finds itself be'eretz midbar, even if it's gone back to where it comes from, it hasn't gone higher than where it comes from. I circled the next line. The neshama needs to have mercies evoked regarding her, from a level which is totally above Ishtalshalus, which is the madreg of Kinesher Yair Kino. So we learned half a maimer. That's all I did. It took us a long time. What's the teichen of this half a maimer? The teichen of this half a maimer is Rachmanis. And that when you say that Kinesher Yair Kino, that Hashem is compared to an eagle, but he's higher than an eagle. He's higher than the physical eagle, he's compared to the spiritual eagle. He's higher than the spiritual eagles compared to the eagle in Atzilus. He's higher than the eagle in Atzilus is Rachmanis, which is higher than Seder Ishtalshalus. Which means he's even having Rachmanis on Yidden who are in very high levels, that on themselves they cannot see that it's a Rachmanis, and therefore, B'rachamecha Rab Menachem Aleinu. And the mitzvah tonight at 8, there'll be another class, and we're going to learn the beginning and the end. And what the Rebbe is going to do is he's going to divide it into 3 and then a 4th. And the 3 are going to be compared to a number of things. One of them is going to be Elul, Aseh Tshuva, and Yom Kippur, based on the Rambam. And the 4th, he doesn't say what it is, but you have to assume that it's Sukkot. He's also going to compare it very briefly to what we had in the Maimed of Tafshil Lamed Zayin. I have to tell you this. I announced, and I've been doing it, that every year we should start not with Rosh Hashanah, but the Maimed of Erev Rosh Hashanah. So we learned the Maimed of Lamed Zayin. The last Maimed of it's a very long Maimed. We learned it. The Maimed was Yem Tchalas Masecha. Guess what I found? That in the footnotes in our Maimed, the Rebbe references also the Maimed of Atan Nitzavim. I should have learned 2 Maimedim from Lamed Zayin before we learned the Maimed of Lamed Ches, but it's impossible to know this before. So this we'll learn in a year. We'll have time to forget, then we'll learn it all over, and hopefully we'll learn it in a way which does not contradict what we're doing here. But the Rebbe is going to speak about 3 in Yonah. The first is that he wakes us up. The second is that he totally envelops us. And the third, that we become one with him, we become even higher than Avrasi, higher than Atzilas. And the Rebbe is going to connect it to the season. He's going to connect it to every day. He's going to connect it to the 3 Pirushim in He'amarta, Lashon Shevach, and Lashon Levush, and Lashon Dibur. I will see you later.